"You won't need to worry about the house anymore, Mom," my son said with a smile at the lawyer's office, as if he were discussing the weather instead of removing my name from the life I had spent 43 years building beside my husband. I remember staring at Ryan across that polished walnut conference table, noticing how relaxed he looked in his navy suit, one arm draped casually over the back of Sabrina's chair while she sat beside him with her manicured hands folded neatly in her lap. Nicole was there too, scrolling through her phone until the lawyer cleared his throat. None of them looked nervous. None of them looked ashamed. That was the part that hurt the most. Howard Mills adjusted his glasses and slid a stack of documents toward me. The air inside the office smelled faintly of coffee and printer paper, cold and sterile, nothing like the warm scent of cedar and pipe tobacco that still lingered in my late husband's workshop at home. 6 months. It had only been 6 months since Thomas died. 6 months since I stood beside a gray granite headstone in the November rain while Ryan promised me I would never be alone. "This is just a standard restructuring," Howard explained carefully, though he avoided looking directly at me. "The trust would transfer management authority to your children for convenience moving forward." Convenience. Such a small word for something so cruel. I looked down at the papers. My hand stayed perfectly steady, even though I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The house on Willow Creek Road. The lake cabin in Vermont. The investment accounts Thomas and I built together, one careful paycheck at a time. Everything had arrows and signatures and legal language wrapped around it like barbed wire. My name appeared less and less the further I read. Sabrina leaned slightly toward me, her voice soft in that practiced way she used whenever she wanted to sound caring. "We're just thinking about the future, Evelyn. This is a lot for someone your age to manage alone." Someone your age. I almost smiled at that. I was 71, not helpless. Just 6 weeks earlier, I had climbed a ladder in my garage to replace a light fixture myself because Ryan never returned my calls about helping me. But now they sat there studying me carefully, waiting to see if I would cry or panic or beg them to reconsider. Howard slid a pen across the table. "If you'd like to sign today, we can finalize everything immediately." Ryan finally looked me in the eye then. There was impatience there. Not concern, not kindness, just impatience, like he wanted to finish this unpleasant little chore before lunch reservations. "It's honestly for the best, Mom," he said. "The property taxes alone are getting insane, and maintaining a 5-bedroom house at your age isn't realistic anymore." I folded my leather gloves carefully in my lap before answering. "Your father built that house for us," I said quietly. "I know every floorboard in it." Sabrina crossed one leg over the other. "Exactly. It's too emotional for you there now." I noticed the way she said you instead of us. Not once had she referred to it as my home. To her, it was already an asset waiting to be divided. Nicole finally looked up from her phone long enough to sigh dramatically. "Mom, nobody's trying to hurt you here." I turned toward her slowly. "Then why do I feel erased?" Silence settled over the room after that. Heavy, uncomfortable. Howard cleared his throat again, but nobody spoke. Through the office window, I could see downtown Hartford covered in pale February snow, people hurrying down the sidewalks with coffee cups in their hands, living ordinary afternoons while my entire family quietly dismantled my life around me. Ryan leaned forward at last. "You're overthinking this." Maybe I was supposed to believe that. Maybe they had rehearsed this conversation beforehand, convincing themselves I would simply surrender because grief had made me weak. But grief does strange things to a woman. Sometimes it breaks her. Sometimes it sharpens her. I reached for the papers and turned another page slowly. That was when I noticed something odd near the final section. A reference to an amended trust dated only 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. Long after Thomas died. My eyes lingered on Howard's signature. Then on Ryan's. Sabrina suddenly shifted uncomfortably beside him. Just for a second. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. And in that moment, sitting in that cold lawyer's office while my children smiled politely and prepared to remove me from my own life, I realized something far worse than betrayal had happened. Someone in that room was lying. I did not sign anything that afternoon. Howard tried to keep his voice calm as he gathered the papers back into a neat stack, but I noticed the tightness in his jaw. Ryan looked irritated now, no longer pretending to be patient. Sabrina avoided my eyes completely, focusing instead on the silver bracelet around her wrist like it suddenly required all her attention. Nicole sighed loudly and reached for her coat before anyone else moved. We can revisit this next week, Howard said carefully. There is no rush. But there had been a rush. I could feel it sitting in that room long after the meeting ended. The moment I stepped outside into the freezing February air, the tension in my chest sharpened instead of fading. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward my car alone. Ryan had not offered to drive me home. Neither had Nicole. The parking garage smelled like wet concrete and motor oil, and for the first time in months, I felt something stronger than grief beginning to push through the numbness. Suspicion. During the drive back to Willow Creek Road, I kept replaying the details in my mind. The amended trust dated 3 weeks earlier. Thomas had already been gone nearly 6 months. He could not have authorized changes, which meant someone else had. The late afternoon sky hung low and gray above Hartford, and traffic crawled through slushy intersections while I gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. By the time I pulled into my driveway, dusk had already settled across the neighborhood. My house stood exactly as Thomas left it. The porch light glowed softly against the snow. Wind chimes near the garage swayed in the cold breeze with that hollow little sound he used to love. For several seconds, I stayed inside the car without moving. I remembered the day we bought this place 43 years earlier. Thomas had walked through the empty living room smiling like a boy, talking about future Christmas mornings and grandchildren running down the staircase. Back then, the wallpaper was yellow, and the kitchen counters were cracked linoleum. We rebuilt everything together slowly over decades. One paycheck at a time, one weekend project after another. Now my children discuss selling it as casually as trading stocks. Inside, the house felt painfully quiet. I hung my coat carefully beside Thomas's old canvas jacket, the one he wore every fall while cleaning leaves from the gutters. His boots were still near the back door. I had not been able to move them yet. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily while I walked toward the kitchen and filled a kettle with water. Simple motions helped calm me. Tea. Honey. The blue ceramic mug Thomas gave me during our trip to Vermont 15 years ago. Outside the window, snow continued falling in slow, silent sheets across the backyard. That was when my phone buzzed. Ryan. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. Mom, he said immediately, sounding frustrated now that the performance from the office was gone. You embarrassed everybody in there today. I almost laughed at that. Did I? Nobody is trying to take anything from you. Then why was my name disappearing from every page? Silence. Just breathing on the other end. Then Sabrina's voice faintly in the background, asking him something I could not hear. Ryan lowered his voice. You are making this harder than it needs to be. Harder for who? I wondered. But I did not ask. I am tired, Ryan, I said quietly. We will talk another day. Before he could answer, I ended the call. My hands remained steady as I placed the phone face down on the counter. Then I noticed something unusual near the kitchen doorway. One of the cabinet drawers was slightly open. Just barely. I frowned. I always closed every drawer before leaving the house. Always. Slowly, I walked toward it and pulled it open the rest of the way. Inside were old utility bills, takeout menus, spare batteries, and beneath them all, an envelope I had never seen before. My name was written across the front in Thomas's handwriting. I stood in the kitchen holding the envelope, while the kettle whistled behind me. For a moment, I could not move. Thomas had always written my name in the same careful way, the E looping slightly lower than the rest of the letters. Seeing that familiar handwriting again after 6 months felt like hearing his voice through a closed door. My fingers trembled only once before I steadied them against the counter. Outside, snow tapped softly against the kitchen windows while the grandfather clock continued its slow rhythm from the hallway. I turned off the stove, carried the envelope to the dining room table, and sat down beneath the chandelier Thomas installed himself 20 years ago after insisting the old fixture looked cheap and crooked. The room still carried traces of our life together. His reading glasses rested on the buffet cabinet exactly where he left them. One of his old jazz records still leaned near the stereo. Some mornings I could almost convince myself he had simply gone out for coffee. I slid one finger beneath the envelope flap carefully. Inside was a single folded letter and a brass key taped to the paper. My chest tightened immediately. Thomas hated hiding things. He used to joke that secret compartments belonged in detective movies, not family homes. Which meant if he had hidden something, he must have believed he would not have time to explain it himself. Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means something does not feel right. That first sentence alone made my stomach drop. I read the letter twice before continuing. Your instincts were always better than mine when it came to people. I ignored too much because I wanted peace in this family. If Ryan or Nicole ever pressure you about the house or the trust, do not sign anything until you open the cedar box in my workshop. Everything you need is there. Howard does not know about it. Nobody does. I stopped reading. The silence around me suddenly felt heavier. Howard does not know about it. Earlier that afternoon, he had acted like every document in existence had passed through his office. Yet Thomas clearly hid something from him intentionally. I looked down at the brass key taped beside the letter. Small, worn, old-fashioned. My mind drifted immediately toward the workshop behind the garage. Thomas spent half his life there building cabinets, restoring old furniture, and escaping family arguments whenever holiday dinners became tense. Ryan used to love helping him sand wood when he was little. I remembered finding them both covered in sawdust one summer afternoon while country music played from a tiny radio on the shelf. Back then, Ryan adored his father. Somewhere along the years, ambition had replaced warmth inside him little by little until every conversation became about investments, taxes, or properties. Sabrina only sharpened whatever had already been growing there. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope before standing. The workshop sat detached behind the garage, dark beneath the falling snow. I pulled Thomas's old wool coat tighter around my shoulders before stepping outside. The cold February air bit at my cheeks immediately. Snow reached nearly 4 inches deep across the backyard, untouched except for faint rabbit tracks near the fence. The motion light flickered on as I approached the workshop door. My breath caught slightly when I pushed it open. The familiar scent of cedar wood, machine oil, and old coffee wrapped around me instantly. For the first time in months, I felt close to Thomas again. His tools still hung neatly along the pegboard exactly where he left them. Measuring tape, clamps, sanding blocks, everything organized with military precision. The old space heater sat in the corner beside a faded baseball cap Ryan gave him 15 years earlier. I stepped farther inside, my boots creaking softly against the wooden floorboards. Then I saw it. A cedar chest tucked beneath the workbench against the back wall. I had never noticed it before. Slowly, I knelt beside it and held the brass key between my fingers. My reflection trembled faintly in the polished metal lock while the wind rattled softly against the workshop windows. Somehow I already knew whatever waited inside that box was going to change everything I believed about my family. I inserted the brass key into the lock slowly, listening to the faint click that echoed in the quiet. Workshop. The cedar chest felt heavier than I expected, as if it were guarding decades of secrets. I lifted the lid carefully, revealing neatly stacked documents, envelopes with my name written in Thomas's precise handwriting, and a small leather-bound notebook. Each piece of paper seemed to hum with importance. I picked up the first document, a copy of the original will Thomas had signed 30 years ago, before we even moved into the house on Willow Creek Road. My eyes scanned the words, familiar yet profoundly reassuring. Everything I had feared was untrue. The house, the cabin, and the accounts were all left to me. Every asset, every investment, every carefully planned nest egg. Whoever had tampered with the trust had no real claim. My fingers traced the ink lines of Thomas's signature, steady and confident, as if he had known I would need this evidence to restore balance. I moved on to the envelopes with letters. Each one contained instructions, detailed and precise, about what to do if anyone tried to circumvent his wishes. One letter was addressed to Howard Mills, but sealed with a note that read, "Only to be opened if Evelyn doubts my intentions." My heart tightened. Howard had never mentioned any hidden documentation. For months, I had trusted his words, believing he would act in good faith. But Thomas had anticipated human weakness. I took a deep breath and examined the small notebook. It was a ledger of family gifts, payments, and minor adjustments to accounts, all meticulously recorded. Some entries showed sums transferred to Ryan and Nicole over the years, while others noted assets kept separate for my security. Sabrina's subtle maneuvers now made sense. She had likely assumed she could manipulate Howard, or perhaps she did not even care about legality. She only wanted control. I closed the chest and held the leather-bound notebook to my chest for a moment, feeling a warmth I had not experienced in weeks. I realized the power of knowledge and preparation. Thomas had left me the tools to protect what was mine, and more importantly, to reveal the truth to those who had attempted to erase me. I stepped back from the chest and took a careful inventory of the space around me. The workshop smelled of cedar and machine oil, comfortable and familiar, like a cocoon. The light from the overhead bulb cast long shadows, creating a private theater where I could consider my next steps. I would not rush, nor would I confront them hastily. I would gather Howard, review every document, and plan a measured response that left no room for doubt or debate. Outside, the wind whistled softly through the pines, carrying the scent of snow and frost. It was quiet in the neighborhood, the kind of quiet that allows thoughts to settle and decisions to crystallize. I sat down on the old stool by the workbench, opened the first letter again, and read through the instructions carefully. My mind was alert and calm, calculating, aware of every nuance. For the first time since that afternoon in the lawyer's office, I felt the weight in my chest lift slightly. The chest contained not just papers, but a roadmap to restore order, to assert my place, and to expose deception without yielding to anger. Each document reinforced a pattern I had suspected but could not prove. My children had acted with confidence, unaware that everything they had assumed about my powerlessness was wrong. Thomas had trusted me to carry his legacy, and now I was ready to honor that trust fully, one deliberate step at a time. I carried the envelope and the brass key back to the living room, where the familiar scent of Thomas's cedar furniture mingled with the soft aroma of brewing coffee. The winter afternoon light fell gently across the hardwood floors, reflecting off the polished surface of the sideboard where his photo always stood. I set the envelope carefully beside the armchair he had claimed as his own, as if laying down a piece of the past to examine it in the present. Each document I retrieved from the cedar chest had a quiet weight, the kind that demands attention without shouting. I sorted them methodically on the table, stacking letters by date and importance. The original will, the trust documents, and the handwritten notes now formed a small fortress of proof. I noticed the handwriting in the margins, Thomas's careful loops, instructing me on what to do if certain contingencies arose. One note instructed me to wait until the right moment to reveal the truth if anyone tried to undermine my rights. I allowed myself a slow exhale, realizing that the quiet patience he had embedded into these documents was my advantage. Outside, the snow continued to fall in soft, muffled layers, coating the yard and muffling the distant traffic of the suburban streets. I moved to the window, letting my eyes trace the familiar shape of the property. The house, the gardens, the workshop, all untouched, a sanctuary preserved, waiting for me to assert the rightful order. I sat back down, picking up the ledger of family transactions. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer neatly recorded, a trail that would make any attempt to manipulate the truth impossible. I could imagine Ryan and Nicole discussing the house and the accounts with calculated precision, oblivious to the evidence hidden in plain sight. Sabrina's careful movements in the office that day now seemed almost comical compared to the reality of the documents in front of me. I placed the ledger beside the will and allowed myself a small smile. The moment of realization settled into a quiet determination. I would not rush to confront them. I would not show anger or frustration. Every move would be measured. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, remembering Thomas's voice calmly advising me through his notes. The coffee's warmth seeped into my hands, steadying my thoughts. I knew the steps I would take, each one deliberate, ensuring that the truth could not be denied. I could allow Ryan and Nicole to think they had control while I prepared the revelation that would set the record straight. Sabrina's assumptions, Ryan's impatience, Nicole's indifference, all would be met with the evidence that Thomas had carefully preserved. I leaned back, allowing the afternoon light to wash over the papers, each one a promise of clarity and justice. For the first time since the lawyer's office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The documents were more than paper. They were my assurance, my safeguard, and the silent voice of Thomas guiding me. I folded the letter once more and placed it gently atop the ledger, feeling the shift in the room as if the air itself recognized the change. Outside, the snowflakes continued to settle quietly, untouched, and I felt ready to move forward, carrying the legacy and the knowledge that the truth was firmly in my hands. I spent the evening quietly preparing the kitchen for a small dinner, though it was just for myself. The table was set with the white china Thomas had insisted we use on special occasions, polished silverware placed precisely where he had always arranged it, and the crystal glasses lined neatly at each seat. I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee and poured it into the familiar blue ceramic mugs that Thomas had gifted me for our anniversary 20 years ago. The aroma filled the room, mingling with the faint scent of cedar from the workshop documents I had brought in earlier. I did not expect anyone to join me. This was a moment to consider the plans I had set in motion and to review the instructions Thomas had left behind in the cedar chest. I took the letters, the trust documents, and the ledger of family transactions and arranged them across the table so each could be reviewed at a glance. Every word, every calculation, every signature was deliberate. I sipped the coffee slowly, allowing the warmth to settle into my hands as I considered the next steps. Outside, snow fell silently, muffling the distant sounds of the neighborhood. I could see faint footprints leading to the garage from earlier when I had retrieved the chest. They reminded me of Ryan and Nicole walking through the driveway months ago, carefree and unaware of the consequences their decisions would bring. Sabrina's presence in the office had felt calculated, like a chess move anticipating all possible outcomes. Yet she had no idea I had discovered the full board. I opened the ledger again, noting the precise details of deposits and transfers, cross-referencing dates with the amended trust that Howard Mills had presented that afternoon. It was all meticulously planned, but Thomas had anticipated manipulation, and I now held the power to correct it. I placed the letters in a neat stack and retrieved the small notebook, scanning for additional notes Thomas had left about potential contingencies. Each sentence reminded me of his foresight and my own role in ensuring that his intentions would be honored. I made mental notes of the order in which the documents should be revealed, which letters would prompt immediate acknowledgement, and which accounts needed verification first. My mind mapped out a sequence that would leave no room for denial or misinterpretation. I refilled the mugs with fresh coffee, the steam rising in gentle swirls, and imagined Ryan and Nicole sitting at this very table, unaware of the evidence I possessed and the strategy one would employ. I allowed a brief smile to touch my lips, not of triumph, but of calm assurance. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock and the muffled whistle of the wind through the pines. Each movement I made was deliberate, measured, a rehearsal of sorts for the conversations to come. I set the letters aside, knowing that patience would maximize their impact. I allowed myself a few moments to breathe, to observe the snow layering the backyard, the way the light dimmed gradually over the horizon, and the stillness of the room. It was a quiet strength, a preparation for the careful revelation of the truth, and a recognition that every decision I made now would honor Thomas's memory and secure the rightful order of the family affairs. I arranged the documents from the cedar chest across the dining table, each one in plain sight, the ink and signatures clearly visible beneath the afternoon light filtering through the frost-lined windows. I poured another cup of dark roast coffee, the steam rising in gentle tendrils, and set it beside the letters. For a moment, I allowed myself to sit back and imagine Ryan, Nicole, and Sabrina entering this room, unaware of the evidence now in my hands. Their earlier confidence in the lawyer's office now seemed fragile as the snowflakes settling outside. I spread out the ledger of financial transactions and the original will, lining them up in the order I planned to reveal them. Each page held proof, each signature a shield. I envisioned the moment when Howard Mills would witness the contrast between the amended documents and the originals Thomas had secured. A quiet determination settled over me. I would not rush. I would not show impatience or anger. Every move would be measured, deliberate. I picked up the small notebook with Thomas's instructions and reviewed the contingencies one more time. The steps were clear. Allow them to believe they controlled the situation, wait until the right moment to present the evidence, and then reveal the full truth with calm certainty. The kettle whistled again, breaking the silence, and I poured another cup of coffee, feeling the warmth steady my thoughts. I glanced around the dining room, taking in the photographs of family moments past, the polished silverware, the crystal glasses, all reminders of a life carefully built and preserved. Outside, the wind stirred the snow across the yard, yet the house remained still and secure. I considered how Ryan and Nicole had underestimated me, how Sabrina had assumed her subtle manipulations would go unnoticed. They had no idea I had discovered the trust documents, the original will, and the ledger that clearly detailed the rightful ownership of every asset. I folded the letters gently and stacked them in the order I intended to reveal them, each one a quiet assertion of what was mine. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, each tick a reminder of the careful patience required for what was to come. I practiced the sequence in my mind, the order of documents, the timing of each revelation, the calmness in my voice. I imagined the expressions that would cross their faces when they saw the truth laid bare, the realization that their assumptions about my helplessness were incorrect. I felt no anger, only the quiet satisfaction of being prepared. Every detail Thomas had left, every instruction, every note, was a tool I would use with precision. I sipped the coffee slowly, savoring the warmth and the clarity it brought. The workshop light in the background cast long shadows across the room, framing the documents with an almost cinematic glow. I could see the path ahead clearly, measured, deliberate, and guided by the trust Thomas had placed in me. The moment of revelation would come, and when it did, it would be executed with quiet authority, leaving no room for doubt, no opportunity for denial, and ensuring that the truth was seen and acknowledged in its entirety. I gathered the carefully organized documents and carried them to the study, the quiet hum of the heating system filling the otherwise still house. The winter evening had deepened into a soft twilight, the pale light slipping through the frost-lined windows, illuminating the polished wood floors. I set the letters, the original will, and the ledger across the antique writing desk that Thomas had refinished himself decades earlier. Each piece was a reminder of careful planning and deliberate protection. Every signature and annotation Thomas had left now a beacon of certainty. I sipped from the steaming mug of coffee beside me, savoring the warmth, the steadying effect it had on my thoughts. Howard Mills would be the first to review them again, though this time I would guide the pace. The sequence mattered, the order of revelation critical. I imagined the expressions on Ryan, Nicole, and Sabrina as each piece of evidence emerged. Their assumptions about my supposed frailty would crumble silently, their confidence replaced with stunned recognition. I carefully examined the letters again, noting Thomas's precise instructions and contingencies. Each note clarified what could be disclosed immediately, what needed verification, and how the story of their attempted manipulation should be presented. The shadows from the table lamp stretched across the room, framing the documents in a soft, deliberate light. I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the months since the lawyer's office. The disappointment, the quiet tension, the awareness that my children had underestimated both my patience and my attention to detail. Every movement, every gesture, every word they had spoken now sat in stark contrast to the unassailable truth Thomas had secured in these documents. I set the first envelope aside and opened the ledger once more, methodically reviewing each transaction, each transfer, each note of intent from Thomas. The clarity of the records removed any doubt, any possibility of misinterpretation. I could see how Sabrina had tried to maneuver control, how Ryan had assumed he could navigate the family affairs without oversight, and how Nicole had failed to recognize the deliberate structure Thomas had created. Each page reinforced my plan, confirming the sequence and timing for revealing the full scope of the truth. I organized the documents into a logical flow, determining the order in which they would be presented to maximize comprehension and minimize denial. I sipped the coffee again, feeling the warmth settle through my chest, steadying my resolve. Outside, the wind stirred the pines lightly, brushing snow against the windows in a soft rhythm. The house remained quiet, a sanctuary holding the legacy intact. I rose and walked to the window, observing the familiar contours of the backyard, the layers of snow and the fading light. Everything waited in patient stillness, just as it should. I returned to the desk and laid out the documents one final time, each stack aligned, each envelope in position. The room was ready, the evidence complete, the path to reveal the truth deliberate and undeniable. I allowed a slow, calm breath, sensing the shift in the air as if the house itself acknowledged the coming resolution. Every step I would take from this point would be deliberate, measured, and unassailable, honoring Thomas's intentions and ensuring that those who had attempted to undermine the rightful order of the family would be faced with the undeniable reality of their actions. I arranged the final documents on the dining table, ensuring that each envelope, ledger, and note was visible and easily accessible. The soft glow from the chandelier reflected off the polished surfaces of the furniture, highlighting the careful order I had established. I poured a fresh cup of dark roast coffee and held it in my hands, feeling the warmth seep into my palms and steady my thoughts. Outside, the evening had deepened into a quiet, snow-covered night, the suburban streets illuminated by the soft halo of streetlights, their reflections dancing across the frozen sidewalks. I pictured Ryan, Nicole, and Sabrina entering the room, expecting to find an elderly woman overwhelmed by circumstance, unaware of the meticulous preparation I had undertaken. Howard Mills would guide them through the documents, but I would control the narrative, revealing each piece of evidence in a deliberate sequence. I began with the original will, sliding it across the table so that the signatures and annotations were clearly visible. Ryan looked at it first, his confident expression faltering slightly as he noticed the contrast between this and the amended trust he had relied upon earlier. Nicole leaned forward, squinting at the ledger of transactions, the meticulous notes of deposits, transfers, and dates exposing the inconsistencies in her assumptions. Sabrina's eyes widened as she reached for one of the envelopes, her composure slipping as she read Thomas's instructions for contingencies. I watched quietly, my posture composed, letting the documents speak for themselves, each revelation a quiet assertion of truth. Howard explained the original documents and the safeguards Thomas had put in place, his voice calm but firm, reinforcing the clarity of the evidence before them. I could see comprehension dawning on their faces, the realization that their earlier assumptions about my inability to respond were completely mistaken. I did not raise my voice. I did not plead or argue. I simply allowed the presentation to unfold naturally, each piece of paper delivering its weight and meaning. After the final envelope was opened, a stillness filled the room, a recognition of the careful planning and foresight Thomas had embedded into these documents. Ryan and Nicole exchanged glances, the confidence that had guided their actions now tempered with humility. Sabrina remained silent, the initial certainty in her demeanor replaced by the undeniable presence of truth. I leaned back slightly, allowing the moment to settle. The coffee had cooled, but I held the cup loosely in my hands, savoring the quiet satisfaction of preparedness and foresight. Outside, the snow continued to fall in muted swirls, a quiet witness to the resolution within the house. I could feel the shift in the air, a subtle acknowledgement that the rightful order of the family affairs had been restored. The documents remained neatly arranged, a testament to careful planning and deliberate action. I set the cup down and allowed my gaze to drift toward the windows, observing the soft outlines of trees and rooftops, the world continuing quietly while the balance inside the house had been reestablished. In that moment, I felt a calm authority, a measured sense of closure. My children had been faced with the truth, and the household, though quiet, had returned to its rightful structure. Every careful step, every instruction Thomas had left, had guided me to this precise point, and I sat there, quietly assured that the legacy and intentions of the past had been fully honored and secured.